All
All
right.
right. Thank you again, everybody, and welcome, Stacy Quaid. Thank you so much for being with us, Stacy.
Oh, thanks for having me, and thanks for joining me on this adventure and just exploring herbalism from a beginner's perspective. And we're just gonna these classes are quick, so we aren't going to be going super in depth with the topics each night. But what I'm hoping for is that you're gonna um, get a chance to get your interest peaked, and maybe this will unfold into some deeper learning. So the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen and pull up the slideshow. Let's see, get rid of this and find my little, there we go. So here we go. Welcome to Herbalism for Beginners. So here's our outline. So tonight we're going to talk about the just a brief history of Western herbalism, where our roots come from, how it kind of all fits together and has evolved to this current day. Next week we're going to talk about different categories of herbs and how we define them and break that down and then to how they're used. We're going to move on to constitutions, which is another way that we find out how things are used, and particularly for each person is as a specific way to learn how to use the herbs that are going to be the best for us, and the different ways that we can learn how to notice that. Doctor of Signatures is one of those ways, and that's just one piece of a way that we can use a system that we can use to look at learning the herbs better. Then for the class 5, we're going to talk about ways to use the herbs and different kinds of things that you can make. And this is not going to be like right in a row the whole time. I mean, things are going to get kind of sprinkled through, and questions if you have them as we're going about the different herbs. It's it's going to be a little bit more blended than just this list, but this is a rough outline to kind of keep us on track and get through some of the different ways of looking at this as a whole system and process and practice. And then hopefully we're going to be able to spend a lot of time just learning about different specific herbs that you can get to learn better. So starting with our history, herbalism has its roots beginning in Africa. And this is like way, way ancient history. This is what many centuries before Christ. And as the history began in Africa, like so much more of human history, and moved into Egypt and through the ages in the Egyptian era, we moved into Greek and Roman times. So most of the information that I'm talking about with this ancient history and progressing us through the decades and through the centuries, it comes from my teacher Matthew Wood. He's a great historian. He has tons of detail, and a lot of this information came actually from a talk that he gave, that I took some notes and sort of summarized. So there's a ton more detail out there, but these are some of the names that you're going to hear as you become a more practiced herbalism and learn more. Hippocrates, a lot of the medical history and herbal history comes through Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath, which is part of our actual Western medical system, also has its roots here. And so we didn't used to be so separate in a lot of ways. Galen is another name that you're going to hear. He's a little bit more recent, if you consider 129 AD more recent. And he had his time in Roman and Greek herbalism. Paracelsus, from the 1400s and 1500s, he was an alchemist, and he has a lot to do with some of the different ways that we practice Western herbalism today, and we're going to flesh that out a little bit more. So in the 15 and 1600s, in old world Europe and in like Scotland and Ireland and those countries in England, there was more influence from the Druidic cultures. And we see a blending of those kinds of plant medicines coming into play and blending with these traditions that came down through the Greek and Roman pathways. As trade was developing and travel was being more widespread between the continents, we see the influences from China and from Eastern India, and things that we use that are spices and Chinese herbs were starting to come through Europe, and people were mixing them into their apothecaries and learning how to use them. So then people started becoming, immigrating into North America. And that's where we get a big piece of the foundation of our Western herbalism from the indigenous Native American peoples in the different areas of the country. And a lot of it comes from the Northeast and the like Columbia Valley side of the United States, where a lot of the practices that people identify as the Native American influence in our Western world for herbalism comes from, because that's where people were settled for so long. And then later on, as people progress across the continent, we get more of that influence from the South American or Southern North American Indian tribes and Native peoples. So each of these eras during the thousands of years contributed to the different knowledge and system of understanding and ways of practicing. And throughout the time, the patterns that were evolving rose out of the fact that people used to live and be closer and be connected to nature. They didn't separate things the way that we do nowadays. There was more specific structure and theory and systems developing throughout this whole time. And those facets of it became the ways that people were able to understand and learn about the herbs. In the ancient Egypt days, much was learned about anatomy, not because of just for humans, but for animals, because they were, dissecting and embalming and learning about the organ systems and the way that the bodies were put together. And this was also a big piece of their spiritual life. So there was no separation with this physicalness and the spiritual aspects of this process. They use lots of herbs that are more, again, like the spices and oils and resins to do a lot of their practices. When we progress through the Roman and Greek ages, and from a Chinese and Ayurvedic perspective, we have concepts of humoralism, which also shows up in the Native American and Scandinavian, Northern Europe paths. So humoralism is based on the qualities of the tissue states of the body. And the word that we use more commonly in this day is called energetics. And that we're going to get into more when we start talking about constitutions and ways that we identify what's going on in our bodies and what herbs will help us with rebalancing those things. Astrology was a huge part of herbalism and medicine as a whole in the Renaissance in Europe in the 1500s, and it still is to this day. There's a lot of um, reference and ways that we can use the moon cycles, the elemental energies of the planets and the signs. They were used in the past for things like, I mean, right down to like, is this person going to be able to have this surgery on this day? And if all of the signs that they were using and the charts that they were using weren't lining up, that it was going to be a good time for that organ to be strong to tolerate the surgery, for instance, they might not do it until those things were more in alignment, because they really had a strong belief that all that energy, again, this sort of more spiritual and closer to that holism and living with nature, was really important. And even the medical doctors of the time would have these charts, these astrology charts, and these relational times in their offices, and they would use them as part of their practice. Um, to this day, people do planting and harvesting times according to the planetary cycles, and each planet has an affinity to the different herbs. And there's tons of reference material about this aspect out there, and some really good teachers if this interests you, to make this part of how you're learning. So Father Sebastian showed up in the 1800s, and he was the father of naturopathy. So during this time, nature wisdom was being strengthened, and there was a more holistic approach still around, and it was much stronger in Europe and in Germany. And the actual practice of naturopathy, as we know today, the school of that originated in Germany, and it's still one of their more primary ways of practice. And you can find naturopaths here in the United States, and they just have a broader understanding of these aspects in the way that they treat and do their medicine. Dr. Samuel Hahnemann was around in the 1700s and 1800s, and he was the father of homeopathy. And this system of using herbs homeopathically, herbs and other remedies, was developed up over about 50 years. He was the person that kind of got the ball rolling in that area. So we have eclecticism and physiomedicine. So this whole time, as things were moving from a more holistic to a more structured, schooled way of working with the herbs, there was two kind of clearly defined schools that started to develop. And both of them had very strong opinions about which one was better. So when we look at the, let's see, I think yeah. So physiomedicine came down from the lineage of Samuel Thompson, and it was more of a rationalistic approach. It came more down through the path of looking at the organ systems, looking at the body mechanics, and looking at what is the action, what is going on in the organ, and what is happening with that whole system pattern. And then they would decide what herbs would be the best to correct that action. Eclecticism was a little bit not so sciencey in a way. It was more the people's medicine that had come from the roots of folk use by the common people, by the midwives, by all the natural healers. And they used a broader look at what was going on. They used more observation about what was going on with the person and the environment. They used intuition. They talked about messages that they would get from their dreams. A lot of the Native American process would probably fit more under this than under physiomedicine. Um, and it came through the process of many years of what works for herbs, for what works for with using food as medicine, and just that whole empirical time, time over time over time. Late into the 1800s and the early 1900s, there's two big shifts that happened um, that started the trend to more allopathic medicine. And the first one was the rise of the FDA. And then ultimately, years later, because of that, the patent process, which is in place today, where medications are run through these rigorous tests and they're approved or they're not approved. And that's how allopathic medicine and pharmaceutical industry does its work. The other shift was that there was a separation of this natural world living. People were not as close to nature. They were not as in tune with the patterns of that in a way that kept them grounded and close to their heart, and understanding that more like God in everything, and that aliveness and that energy. They were separating that from medicine, and there was a big shift in religious dogma and keeping things more partitioned, and that kind of continues somewhat to this day. In the 1930s and through the 60s, natural medicine views were persecuted. When you listen to some of our more modern teachers, our more current teachers, and they talk about what it was like to practice in the 60s, and how people were getting thrown in jail just for using herbs and practicing that kind of craft. But we luckily had the 60s and 70s happen, and there was more free thinking, and people were coming more back to nature. They became more environmentally aware. They started exploring different spiritual practices. The first wave of new age kind of came through, and it really opened up the opportunity for some of our current teachers and their predecessors to be able to develop Western medicine as we view it today. So these are my teachers. So I mentioned Matthew Wood already. He is written dozens of books. This is Matthew Wood here up in the corner. He started practicing at a herb shop down in Minneapolis years ago called Present Moments. I believe it's still there today. He is very gifted in teaching. He has an online institute right now called the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, and he's got many different tiers of classes that you can take and sign up. Some of them are ongoing. Some of them are like sections of workshops that you can pay a flat fee for and get through the coursework, and then take a test to get credits for if you want to become a member of the American Herbalist Guild, which is our organization here in the US. And there's also one that's international. So there's some layers of how involved you can be in organizations, and support the continued sustainability of this work. Margie Flint, right up here, she's my mentor. Margie is just, her fourth edition of her amazing book has just come out, is just in print. It's not out yet. Her place of business is called Song Herbals. Margie's been teaching for 40 plus years. She teaches coursework in something called reading the body. And that is one of the primary things that I've learned from her, not just specific herbal focused things, but how to look at the body, to look at the signs of the body, how things are showing up on the outside, and what that means on the inside, and how that relates to, again, tissue states, balances of fluids, and different humors, as we call them, the different ways that our body is showing us what's in balance and what's out of balance. So it's fascinating and really super fun to learn. What does it mean when your these lines show up on the corners of your eyebrows? What organ is that related to? What does it mean when you stick your tongue out and it's bright red around the edges? Those are all ways that we can look at what's showing up, and they're clues from our body. Then we know what herb we can use to help balance that back out. Jim McDonald is from Southern Michigan. He lives down near the Detroit area, about an hour away from Detroit. He also has a website called herbcraft.org, and he's got many online classes through a platform called podia.com. And he is a super fun, energetic teacher. He uses lots of really good analogies and ways that once you learn something from him, it will stick in your brain forever. He helps organize and host the Great Lakes Herb Fair, which is, when it's in person, it is down near Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it's a wonderful, wonderful event that myself and my husband Joseph often go and teach there, as well as just attend. The last 2 years, of course, it's been virtual, and you can look for links to that. Actually, Great Lakes Herb Fair has a Facebook page. They all have Facebook pages and all of those social media links, but you can still get in on the Great Lakes Herb Fair and watch it virtually. I think there's still a window of time if that interests you. There's some great speakers on it this year. And then last but not least, Nicholas Schnell. He is based out of Omaha. His clinic is called the Four Winds Clinic. He has a background not only in Western herbalism, but he blends Chinese medicine into his practice quite a bit. It's a pretty good even blend there. So he knows a lot about the Chinese herbs. He also has a degree in dietitian, and he's the one that I learned the most about GI stuff from, gastrointestinal things, gut health. And he has this wonderful cleanse that we do to help our own body stay healthy and well. And he has a book called The Four Winds Cleanse that I like to share with people. So if you want more information about that piece, you can ask me about it, or we can get you hooked up with Nicholas at the Four Winds clinic that he runs out of Omaha. His wife also works there, and she is also a teacher, and she teaches some other kinds of body work and energy work practices as well. So lots of options. My personal teachers here, there's so many herbalists. This was just the list that I pulled off the top of my head as typing as I went. Tommy Bass and James Duke, they've passed on now. Some of these, Tismal Crow has also passed. but many of these teachers, and there's so many more, I just couldn't even name them all. There's some that are local in the Twin Cities area. Lise Wolf, she practices out of Wisconsin. I just couldn't name them all. So all these people have wonderful books, um, tons of information, and so much more. On my website, there is a page that has suggested books, or actually some of our favorites. And it's not a complete list by far, but it can get you started in looking at different options for reading. And if anybody has any suggestions for books that they've liked, put them in the chat, because there's just so much information out there. And of course, there's tons of stuff online nowadays too. So um, let's see. Are there any questions so far? Let me.
I haven't seen any questions. I do want to reiterate that if you've signed up for one class, you will need to sign up for the next classes if you intend to join us. I tried to make it all in one, but unfortunately, Eventbrite doesn't work that way. So you'll need to register for each of the classes as they come. We do have Mike saying that he goes to the James Duke's Garden at Fulton, Maryland.
I see that. That's very, very cool. Yes, The Green Pharmacy. That is a good book. That is like one of the oldies and goodies. Yeah. Thanks for that. So we're going to move into kind of the ethics, or the do's and don'ts section here. Because that's a really important foundational feat that we always want to make the first step. So there's so many ways that plants can be used to help us with our wellness, and they can be wild herbs, they can be cultivated herbs. They all have specific properties to help us with at all the layers of our being. And you need to remember that they are living entities, and that each plant has an essence, not just a constitution, not just a plant type and a name, but a living spirit that it's sharing with you to help you with your wellness. They are our elders, and they want to help us. They were here first, though, and we're here to help each other. And remembering that they're giving their lives to help you is important. Even if you're not pulling something up by the roots or cutting it down so it's not going to grow back, pulling parts of it off is still traumatic. So when you are gathering or harvesting, you need to make sure you're honoring that contribution and say thank you. Some people, excuse me, some people will leave an offering. You need to connect. You have to ask permission. Maybe someone doesn't want to have the half of their leaves and berries taken off that day. Maybe it's in a place where it's not okay to harvest from for whatever reason. So you need to be careful and respectful. We don't ever want to over harvest. We want to make sure we know how to pick the things that you're giving permission to use in a way that's going to be sustainable. Offering tobacco is a tradition in a lot of Native American culture. My teachers have a lot of indigenous training, and some of my teachers like Paul Red Elk and Karen Sanders are Native American, and it's always part of the ceremony. Before you take anything, you sit down and you ask. Because I didn't really have that Native background, it sometimes in the past felt odd to me to use tobacco. So people do other things. You can, like this last year when it was such a dry year, bringing water with you and actually watering some plants out in the wild. adding some hydration so that they can have a chance to keep growing was a good thing to do. Some people will leave other nutrition, things that would help support, compost, things like that. But during the Great Lakes Herb Fair, there was a speaker from a tribe down in Michigan, and he talked about how that tobacco is for everyone, and that using the tobacco as a offering it's for whoever is living on the land at that time and being the steward. So it really crossed the threshold of it's not my tradition, that I can use that too, and that the tobacco is there for us to use as well, because we are the stewards of this land now. And so that felt really good to me to hear that that teacher um, say that and give permission in that way. But what you want to do is figure out what works for you and then do that every time. Even when you're out there picking your carrots or your beans, remember, thank you. So um, we always teach use at least 3 sources of reference, because you want to make sure you have the right thing that you think you have. And there are a lot of lookalikes. Luckily, in Minnesota, up here where we live, we don't have too many that can kill you, but we do have some. And I know there's people from across the country here listening, and so there could be more where you live. So 3 references with words that identify, the plant parts and what you're looking for and where they grow, and at least 3 pictures, and not from the same book or website. You want to really cross-reference what you're learning so that you make sure that you pick the right thing. Other safety considerations: picking something that is in a place that you don't know what was growing in the ground before it looks the way it does now. Was there something toxic in the earth? Was there, some kind of weird garbage planted underneath there a couple decades ago from some old farmer? There could be, you need to think about those things. There are certain plants that actually grow in places where things need to be cleaned, and they act as filters, like cattails. That's why you see them in the ditches along the sides of the roads, because they're helping to filter and purify and clean that groundwater. And they also grow in places that are very, very safe to pick them from. Ground ivy grows where the ground has just been disturbed, like amaranth and lamb's quarters. If the ground is bare, nature doesn't like to have bare spots. And so those kinds of plants will fill in to keep things from eroding and to optimize the minerals in the soil that have been exposed. And those are great, great things to let grow in your garden as weeds, because they're great free salad, super nutritious, and have a lot of properties that help us with our blood and iron and cardiovascular system. So it's learning those things that we'll talk more about as we go. Downstream is important. We're all downstream from something. So, is there road runoff on, are you far enough away from salt and, exhaust and toxic things that are getting tossed out into the woods near the edges of the road? So we like to say 25 to 50 feet. Now, if you're in like on an old logging road that hasn't been used for a very long time, and there's hardly any car traffic or any traffic at all on it, you've got a little wiggle room there. If you find a patch of whatever raspberries growing right next to, the edge of the roadway. So those are the kinds of things that you use common sense for. Other safety precautions that we want to address are things like pregnancy, small doses for children and elders. You know, elders often can not need as much, just like children. And we want to think about who we're sharing things or recommending for as we become more practiced, and we want to share what we know. Typically, food kinds of herbs or ones that are um, more food as medicine kinds of herbs made into like a cup of tea, they're not going to usually cause great distress in people. But these are things that we do need to caution if we're going to start sharing with anybody. So um, a lot of people are alcohol sensitive, and you can do a lot of your preparations with water, with vinegar, or with glycerin, so that if you're making tinctures, you don't have to use an alcohol base. We can do things in vinegars. We can use a lot of different mediums to carry the medicine to ourselves and to people that we might want to share that with. Photosensitivity is another thing that happens with some kinds of herbs. St. John's wort and citrus oils are really highly um, photosensitive, and you can um, have trouble if you are using some of these things and then you're out in the sun with sunburn and different problems with your skin. So, and there's always allergies out there. Some people know their allergies and some people don't. I have a friend who didn't know she was allergic to chamomile until she had some chamomile tea, and that was an unpleasant experience for her. So those are the kinds of things that you just want to be mindful of, not to scare, but just to be mindful. If you're using essential oils, which is another way that people can use herbs, we need to remember that they are super concentrated and that you don't want to put them inside your bodies. There are um, some schools of thought out there that suggest that putting essential oils in your body is a good and okay thing, but they are very, very strong and they can cause damage to your internal organs. So use caution with that. One of my teachers that is a clinical aromatherapist gave the statistic that 1 drop of essential oil is the same as 5 to 20 cups of tea, depending on what herb you're using. So if you're putting peppermint drops in your water, think about, would you drink 20 cups of peppermint tea? That's kind of what you're putting in your body. So you want to keep that in mind. And then, of course, there's a lot of people on medications nowadays. And so that is something that I'm always double checking myself as a practitioner. If I'm going to be giving herbs to somebody, that we need to make sure that if it's something that's got blood thinning properties, for instance, that they're not already on something for thinning their blood, etc. We'll talk more about that throughout the course. So back to just the whole ethics of it, and then we'll do some more. We'll be done with the slideshow here shortly. Is, you know, ask permission, use everything, share, and be grateful. You want to always return your mark to the earth. You want to compost what you don't use or bring it back out to the woods. Karen Sanders says for every one you take, you put 7 times back. And that is the way that we keep the earth here for us to be able to continue to use. So now we're gonna stop screen sharing. And do you have any questions so far? What does this say? Oh, that's from Jennifer. So you can sign up for the next classes. Okay.
Mike mentioned that there's a plant ID app, or there's actually several. I have one. I would be kind of cautious with those just because sometimes it seems like it's guessing.
Yeah. Mike, which one do you use?
Well, I'm using it's called Leaf Snap, but there was a bunch. But I downloaded it because that was the first thing that came up because I was looking at a plant and I was just curious about it. Had berries, it was dry, but I was just trying to figure out what kind of berries it was.
Sure. And they are good to a certain point. I've used Plant Snap, and then I can't think of the other one right now, but and the free ones, they have limited databases. But you can go to the oh no, I'm not going to remember. It's like there's a database for each state where you can go and put in a plant. You need to know a little bit more about like maybe what you think it is to use these, but they can be very handy and they'll give you tons of information. And there's also, again, looking at the books and learning things is a really important thing. Starting to learn about the botany and how plants are built will help you when you're trying to use a picture to identify a plant. You can look at, okay, what type of leaf structure is this? I see the stem is coming out this way, and then the leaves are, ovate, or they're round, or they're jaggedy on the edge, and those kinds of things are all helpful little details that as you learn more about the botany of it, that will help you identify, even when you're using those Plant Snap or Leaf Snap or whatever it is, you can then cross-reference what they pull up just on the actual internet and see if it pulls up other pictures that can corroborate it. There's a book called Botany in a Day, and his last name I think is Pell. I had it here and I think I put it away, but that is a great beginner book to start looking at learning how to put the plants in a family based on the way that they're built, the way that they grow, which again also helps you narrow down when you're using one of those picture apps, what direction to go with it. So if it's pulling up a plant family where you're like, oh, that can't even be right because it's not in the rose family, I can tell right now, it just helps you build your cross-referencing. On the Matthew Wood Institute, there is a course that he is got called Botany for Herbalists. He actually co-teaches it with a gal named Jolie Elan, who actually she passed away about a year ago unexpectedly. She was a young woman, and she's just a great teacher. She was a botanist that was just in love with her job, and it's a really fun course and you learn a lot of really good basics. It really actually helped me get better at it after all these years.
But our
Can you repeat the name of the book, please, Stacy?
Botany in a Day. I think something J.L. Lepel, E-L-E-P-E-L. If you Google Botany in a Day, it'll pull it up. He's even got a little like a card game that you can get with it that you can practice with. So it's kind of fun. Anyway.
Sarah, I saw your hand was up. Did you have something you wanted to add? You can go ahead and unmute if you'd like to.
I'm so sorry. I was just curious, Stacy, what your understanding is between herbalism and Ayurvedic practices.
Yeah, so herbalism is like one piece of using plants and herbs and working with the plant kingdom, our natural world in that way. Ayurvedic is like a whole life system. So it's not just about the practice of using the herbs and the spices. It's about the timing of the day, just it's so much bigger. It's just like the way of life. So there's a lot more layers to just that whole what Ayurvedic means. And we use some of their principles and theories, like when we do talk about constitutions, one of the ways to learn about your constitution is through the Ayurvedic system of doshas. Have people heard about their doshas before? And we're going to get into that a little deeper in the next classes, but it helps us to identify our constitution, whether I run cold or I run dry or I run hot or I run cold, or if I am too much fluid, not enough fluid, and the movement of all of those things and how they work with each other. There's a couple of online find your dosha self-tests you can take. I don't know, I can't think of any like right now off the top of my head that I could say is better than another, but they're fun to do. And if you thought about wanting to do that before our next class, it will give you a little bit of a more insight into what we're going to be talking about. So that might be a fun little piece of prep work for before the next class, is for people to find out what their constitutions are that way. So I wanted to spend at least a little bit of time during each one of these classes to just start introducing to one herb that you can maybe take and play with and get to know in between our classes, because it's a whole month apart. Yes, Julie, dosha. That's how it's pronounced or spelt. Yep. So today I picked out an herb. So we're going to move into this. That is really useful right now with this time. So let's see, Elizabeth. So doshas is the Ayurvedic system of categorizing a body constitution or type. So constitution is a word that means how your system as a whole is in terms of temperature states, tissue conditions, and the way that they interact. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm putting kids to bed. Yes, thank you.
That's okay. No, and then I just suggested that it'd be fun to find out what yours is before next class. So anyway, back to the individual herb, just so you have somebody that you can play around with. I picked thyme. Thyme right now is something that is really good to have in the cupboard or in the fridge, fresh or dried, either way. Make sure you get some and have it around. Right now, during this time of heightened need for immune protection, let's see, I got this beautiful fresh thyme. Can you see it? It's kind of woody. If you could smell it, it smells lovely, fresh. It's got sort of a almost piney kind of fragrance. Thyme is really high in volatile oils. And it is super antimicrobial, which is why it's really good for you to have right now in your house. It's, I'm going to just read here. It's a little bit drying, but it's also got a lot of oils that help soothe tissue. It's kind of pungent in flavor. It's got vitamin C, vitamin A, iron, trace minerals. It's antimicrobial, antifungal, and it's an antioxidant. It can prevent and lessen upper respiratory infections and colds. It's great for topical infections and for wound healing and for different kinds of skin disorders. It's also, because of the volatile oils, it's a good stomach soother. It can help with gas. It can help with an upset stomach. And it can help with things like parasites. Any of the plants with the volatile oils have similar properties, but thyme in particular is really good for this upper respiratory protection. It, as a tea, it's really soothing. It's almost oily. It's really almost buttery when you steep it a little bit longer and you're drinking it. You can just feel it coating your mucous membranes, and that's what we want. And as a result of that, as it's going through your body and as you're drinking enough of it, it's going to coat through your whole mucous membranes. And so then it also can be helpful for urinary tract infections and helping to clear those. Because again, it's antimicrobial. And when we've got little bugs in our bladders that we need to take care of, that it can be helpful because you're washing those volatile oils through your system. So as a tea, it is a great helper for a lot of things, but particularly right now, you're drinking thyme tea every day, you're getting a influx of these antimicrobial agents that are going to help your mucous membranes stay resilient and intact, and going to help to keep things from being able to get in there and stick. Another way that you could use the thyme is to put it in something and make yourself. This is an alcohol tincture that I've started. Again, as a tincture, it's just got this really warming, lovely taste as you take a few drops. And the difference between the tea and the tincture is of strength. Again, like for a tincture, you would take just a few drops versus drinking a couple cups of thyme tea. And you can take sprigs of thyme in hot water. The general rule of thumb when you're making a tea, I don't see who's asking that, but is that for fresh herb, you're going to use twice as much as you would for dried herbs. So if you think about taking this much fresh herb to put into maybe a couple of cups of water, that's going to make you a pretty nice strong tea. And you don't necessarily have to pull it off the stem and fuss with it too much. You know, that if you break it up a little bit more than this, so you're going to get a little bit more of the oils out. You just need to make sure that you can strain it well, and there's different ways that you can do that. I really like to use a French press. I have one that's just dedicated to tea, and that is just a great way to steep a lot of different herbs and make it easy to strain and to drink them. I would suggest that you do the thyme in a pan on the stove, actually, though, and put it on for a little bit longer than just pour hot water over, and let it get a little bit stronger. It's going to have more medicinal value. And if it tastes too strong for you, then you put a little bit of honey in there or something. And honey will also help that antimicrobial upper respiratory protection. The other way that you could get thyme into your system more regularly is to do the same thing, but put it in vinegar, raw apple cider vinegar. And then you're going to use that like on your salads or on your vegetables or different things like that. So definitely drink it as tea. Definitely infuse it in some vinegar. perhaps, make yourself a tincture. We're going to get into how to do all this stuff later on. If you're going to put it into the vinegar, you're going to want to let it sit for a couple of weeks before you use it, and let it just really infuse into that menstruum, we call that, the liquid part. The other thing that I would recommend that you do at the time is infuse it into some oil. So you can just do a real low heat oil infusion. You can and make just a small batch. You don't want to make so much that you can't use it, but then take that oil and put it in your nose. And even without an herb infused oil, my teacher Margie says, oil your nose, because that helps again to keep the bugs and the viruses and things from being able to get into your mucous membranes and stick there and go through your body and have it procreate. So that's just kind of a useful little first aid tip there from Margie Flint. So it looks like some people are lucky, and where they live, they still have thyme growing outside. It's perennial. So it is a great herb to put in your garden because it will come back and come back and come back and grow. So it's just one that you want to just start propagating your own self. And it's a great one to grow in like a windowsill garden in the kitchen. So any questions or thoughts about thyme? I'm seeing some people talking about it in the chat. Is there anything specific not being addressed?
Yeah, Mary Elizabeth mentioned that she uses it for a vapor inhalation during the onset of a cold or after a day in the clinic.
Absolutely. That is another great way to do it. And if you are going to do a steam, a really nice way to do a steam that is easy, so that you can really get the full benefit of it and not just try and sit awkwardly over a pot with a towel over your head, is that you make a pot of it and then you sit down on a chair and you put that pot either on the floor in front of you or on another chair or stool just ahead of your feet. And then you take a sheet or a blanket, like a whole big drape, and you just drape it right over both chairs and the pot and everything, because then you can sit comfortably and really get into that steam tent for 20 minutes or so and really absorb that steam. Just be careful when you take the lid off the pot that you're not right over it so you don't burn your face. Other ways that you can do that are just put it on the stove and let it just go out into the air of the kitchen. We have a wood stove, so I often will put steaming herbs just on top of the wood stove and let them just kind of fill the house. And if you don't want to fuss that much, get some thyme essential oil and get a diffuser and just use your oil diffuser, and there you go. And then it's easy. Anything else? Any other comments?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So thyme is a perennial?
Thyme is well, there's different kinds of thyme. So Thymus vulgaris is the Latin name, and of the thyme that I'm speaking of, the vulgaris, and it is a perennial. And so if you get some plants started, you will be able to just trim them back as the plant is growing, and they'll just keep growing for you, and they get bigger. They can get to be like these little almost shrubby bushes.
How do I know which kind I have out there? I mean, I've got some, and I was just wondering if I should bring it in and replant it in a pot inside for the winter, if I should just harvest it, clip it, and leave the roots outside. Will it grow back?
Where are we talking
I'm in
from?
Minnesota,
Okay, what part?
outside Minneapolis.
there's a good chance that it's probably going to be just fine down there for sure.
Oh, it'll grow back?
Yeah. The
Oh, okay.
That's where the botany part comes in. You know, you'd have to look at the different pieces of it and see if you could, they call it keying it out. Because there's a time that people plant in their garden that's called, oh, like a lavender time. And that one I think is a little less sturdy and more decorative. But if you have lemon time, or there's all kinds of different times that people
True.
have in their culinary gardens, they all have this volatile oil called thymol. That's the property that helps us with the immune part.
So if I want to have it though all winter, if I bring it inside and I plant it inside, will it keep producing and then I can replant it in the spring, or does it need to have a dormant? Does it need to?
You know, I don't know, especially now if you disturb it, if it'll like shock it, and
Oh, okay.
that I'm not 100% sure. I probably myself would leave it outside. I would trim
Okay.
what I could now and
Okay.
dry it or preserve it, and then you know, let it grow and see what happens next year.
Cool.
I
Okay, thanks.
think there's, if Deb Ortman is still on the call, if she's still here, she is maybe got a different or an additional tip for gardening with the thyme. I know I thought I saw her on earlier, but I can't see everybody.
She was here. Debbie, are you still on?
Might have had to go. And whoever's teen is listening to this, thank you. I'm glad. And yes, teaching kids this stuff is really important. I did not have a elder teaching me about herbs when I was growing up, and so all of my learning has come as an adult. So if you've got children in your lives, get them involved and help them learn, and we can teach some kid classes and all kinds of fun things. It's really important to get the kids knowing this stuff.
Well said. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and your involvement. We had some really good suggestions and some comments. And yep, just make sure that you take time to go to the website and check out the classes that are coming up. They're always going to be the final Tuesday of the month. So whether that's the 4th or the 3rd or the 5th Tuesday, just look for the last Tuesday of the month for the co-op classes, and we will have them then. They go through June, I believe. So we have lots and lots to learn.
Well, we'll learn as much as we can and have some fun doing it, hopefully.
Definitely.
Start
And again,
building.
if you are interested in, if you're interested in the recording of this class, you can feel free to email me at jgilbertson@wholefoods.coop. Or you can go through Eventbrite. Our email address is virtualevents@eventbrite.com, I think. We'll have to double check that. But if you send a message through Eventbrite through the herbalism, beginning an herbalism class, you'll reach me. So I can get you the link that way. But thank you.
Also, I'm gonna, I should have done this earlier, but here's my email address if anybody has questions in between. And for anybody that has popped off already, if Jen, you can just, they get to you with some questions, you can always just have them email me.
Definitely.
If you want to go on the website and which is also Energy for Life Connection, and sign up for the newsletter, you can go into the blog and look at different old things that I've written, and there is a whole newsletter dedicated to thyme at one point in the past. So if you're interested.
Wonderful. One more plug. Stacy's husband, Joseph, who she mentioned earlier, is teaching our Thursday night class, which is all about leg care. So if you're interested in learning how to keep your lower extremities healthy as we get older and a little more creaky, then you can sign up for that class on Eventbrite also, or through our website at wholefoods.coop/classes. So thank you again, Stacy. This was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed learning about the history of herbalism, and yeah, I had no clue. Some of those big names in the medical profession are also herbalists. So it was really fascinating.
That was
Thank
the
you,
medicine
everybody,
back
for
then.
attending. You bet.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best medicine.
Right.
So thank you, everybody. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your night. And I hope we see you again next month. Enjoy your
Yes.
holiday season.
Yeah.
Stay well.
Thanks everybody, and thanks for the good questions, and hopefully there's more to come. I'm going to stop the recording. Or no, did you already do that, Jen?
I'm on it right now.
Okay.